So let me first acknowledge the Nanawal and Namri people whose lands I speak from. I pay my respects to them and I recognize that their land was never ceded. Now, coming to the topic of my seminar today, the title of my presentation roughly conveys the unfinished nature of my journey on studying coal in India. This journey started in mid and late 1990s. I feel ancient when I began researching the decay of peasantry and the rapid expansion of coal extraction in eastern India. At that time, I used to take a train from my university town to the colliery area. The train was named Black Diamond Express. That name might convey to you how coal has been seen in post-colonial India. It's the diamond. It's really the Kohinoor on the crown of India. Even today, coal remains at the heart of India's urban industrial development project. Therefore, it is only rational that we should talk about justice at this critical juncture in India's history to ensure that the poor do not get left behind as the country considers moving away from coal. So, The Economist, in its cover story of December 2020, it is true that coal consumption has rapidly grown in Asia. 77% of global coal use is now in Asia. Coal is at the toxic heart of the fossil fuel economy and still 27% of the raw energy of everything globally. Asia is unique because the major coal mining countries have state-controlled mining companies, power stations, and banks. So this is not very different from the global, this is very different from the global north countries. But the question is, as we talk about decarbonization, will coal transition look the same in global south countries, especially in India? To understand what justice would mean in a country like India, we need first to understand coal's role in India. So in its recent report on India, the International Energy Agency notes that it was coal-fired electricity that allowed India to achieve two critical successes. First, the monumental success, which they describe as such, of bringing electricity connections to millions of poor people around the country. And second, to grasp the transformative potential of renewables, particularly solar energy. So yet coal's days are not over in India, not yet. India remains the third largest producer and consumer of coal, as you have shown, and the second largest coal market in the world. It is the third largest emitter of CO2 in the world, even not considering the bunker emissions from biomass burning. So although on a per capita basis, its emission rate is only half of the global average. Putting aside India's population size and the expanding economy, if only I focus on the need that every rural or poor household feels for one electric bulb per house to educate the children, I will not be entirely wrong if I say that much of India's future prosperity will hinge upon coal. It is for valid reasons that India has attributed an iconic status to coal, as I had illustrated in my book, The Coal Nation, published in 2014. However, India is also at a crucial juncture of history when it can choose from a wide array of energy futures. Let us not forget the 270 million people who will leave the rural areas to come to the cities over the next 2 decades to live in these bustling metropolitan centers. The shift away from biomass that will inevitably happen the growing middle classes who will demand air conditioning or other devices, the humongous construction projects that will be undertaken to house them in these mega cities or provide them with increased mobility, and the surge in demand for steel and cement that will drive the construction industry. So it is possible to offer an alternative for coal in this dynamic economy par excellence. In the next slide, I lay out my arguments about India's coal transition. About India, I have two major arguments, and that are laid out in this slide. And Timothy Mitchell, the first argument, as you can see, is drawn from Timothy Mitchell's ideas, carbon democracy. He showed that advent gave rise to unforeseen kinds of mass politics in Europe and America in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In new workplaces, labor unions, political clubs, people, in those places, people forged a political consciousness with which they fought for more egalitarian and democratic collective lives. So coal was the material that not only built new socio-technical worlds, but created new forms of political agency. Extending that argument, we can say that energy transition is making it possible to imagine new forms of energy democracy. And the second, I won't elaborate on that topic, and we can talk about that later. But my second argument is that there is not one coal economy in India, which is what I have elaborated in one of my papers. So in recent years, scholars have actually noted that what we describe as the economy, the monetized part, it is only the tip of the iceberg that is the economy. A very large part of the economy exists beyond or under this tip. Formerly political economists called it the informal economy, but lately Keith Hart has used the term human economy, and Ash Amin, for example, used the word social economy because this segment presents a great diversity in forms of economic transactions, labor and enterprise, unpaid work, care work, and non-capitalist enterprises. The reason why Gibson Graham calls it diverse economies. So coming back to coal, its decline can be attributed to different reasons, depending on the context. In the US, for example, cheaper alternatives, UK North Sea gas, as well, and solar and wind, and sometimes government policies like in the EU. Broadly, there has been a rapid increase in coal production since 2000, driven largely by China's economic growth. This resource-intensive growth triggered a commodity boom from 2003, in which the price of commodities reached a record high investments in coal mining all over the world increased, turning countries like Indonesia and Australia as the main coal exporters in the global market. Still, what do we mean by coal reliance? Let us have a look at that. So with a very competent researcher based in ANU, Donny Pasaribu, I carried out this exercise in which I calculated a coal reliance index, in which we not only looked at coal production, we also looked at employment and economic output, we looked at coal export revenues, and we weighted them and created a coal reliance index in which Australia comes up on top, South Africa, as you can see in the list, and India is at the 9th level. Now, this is globally, right? What is exactly coal reliance within India? Now, let us look at the data. Obviously, that data that you are seeing is a little bit mixed up because it's from the government. It's talking about fuel, right? If you look at, how would coal, I'm now trying to understand coal reliance within India, because just transition discussion globally is characterized by debates on winners and losers. That is, who will gain from the new energy systems, where and how, and taking India as a country, we need to know the entirety of the picture of how coal is extracted, by whom, how it is moved, etc., to make sure that no one is left behind as coal mines are shut. So in this slide, I will draw your attention to some of the recent findings on coal reliance in India to look beyond that 44% figure that you just saw given by the Power Ministry. So think about it. How is coal moved? From the pit head, coal is moved by trucks to a nearby coal depot, from where it is transported again by trucks to the nearby railway station. Although more than 65% of India's cargo is moved by trucks, the trucking industry is entirely in the informal sector. Truck driving is the profession of choice for most poor, illiterate, first-generation migrants from rural areas. So a guesstimate puts the size of the economy at nearly 11,000 million US dollars in 2020. So there are about 2,000 trucks per million people in India. That means around 2 million registered trucks on India's roads. So my conservative estimate would be that at least 1/4 of them would carry coal. So each truck has at least 2 helpers besides the main driver. These 3 individuals have families, and if there are about 4 members in these families, that gives us a ballpark figure of 1.5 million people relying on coal trucking alone, leaving aside the owners of the trucks. This calculation, of course, does not consider relative advantage of transporting coal, say, over other raw materials, trip numbers each truck makes, and the income from distance covered, and so on. So next slide. The trucks bring the coal to railway stations for being moved by wagons that look like this. Indian Railways transport coal from extraction sites to power plants, and the existence of this largest employer in India rely largely on moving coal. According to a study by Brookings Institution, coal provides 45% of the incomes of Indian Railways, which subsidizes its passenger traffic by overcharging the transport of coal, oil, etc. There's another argument that has been going on, which says that a more important problem is over-congestion of the railways, where passenger trains run at full capacity both ways, whereas freight trains return empty. So consider transporting coal by rail to distant power plants as solid electricity being inefficiently moved along an inflexible one-way path. Without massive investments in infrastructure building, it will be impossible to meet the ambitious target of producing 1 billion tons of coal by Coal India Limited alone by 2025. So moreover, as we have written about it, India's coal geography has been changing, and the development of thermal power plants along the coast is one indication of that. And Sandeep Pai's work, who's the co-author of Total Transition book, estimated that micro-level coal reliance using district-level indicators, he says that there are about 600,000 pensioners in the formal coal mining sector. With more coal mine closure, this number will increase to 1 million very quickly. So PI also calculated the CSR spending by coal companies in the districts where they are operating. And the effects of the dwindling CSR incomes would also be significant, he says. So then there are direct and indirect impacts on all these people of coal mine closure. So PI's indicators included more than 15,000 jobs, more than 10,000 pensioners, more than 70 million Indian rupees in CSR spending. And with that, he calculated that 42 districts in India are essentially coal dependent. Now, there is also a land implication. As you know, land is highly contested in India. In case of Charanka solar park in Gujarat and in Assam, farmers actually opposed a solar installation. Additionally, the CBOs have been advocating for environmental conservation and point out that supposed wastelands may actually be fragile and home to unique ecosystems. So there's again researchers with IEEFA, Charles Waddingham, says that it will be, India will need three things to be considered: minimizing the total land use requirements for renewable energy, and the second one is optimizing the identification and assessment of land for renewable generation, and the third one is increasing the stock of potentially suitable land for renewable generation. So in the next slide, many of you are familiar with this. This has been just updated from my previous work that has been published, and it is showing that 2020 roughly figures of various coal productions in various coal economies. I have added a exigent coal in the latest round, latest iteration. Exigent coal is the state PSUs that have now become an actor. Rajasthan, for example, is digging out coal in other states and so on. So it's a very interesting situation. And again, this is in an updated figure. I'm coming really to an end of my presentation. I do not need to go into this, and this is many of you are familiar. This is at the crux of my argument, the second argument. So that India's coal economy is diverse. But let me go to now the question of justice. We are talking about just transition. But all the data that I was presenting there, I wanted to put some human faces on these categories. Winners and losers. We know that there are different kinds of justice, and we're mainly talking about distributive justice here, redistribution. But at the heart of justice is redistribution of power. And to redistribute power in a social sense, the 5 key principles that we need to consider are access to resources, equity, diversity, participation, and human rights. I'm not a philosopher, and I wanted to know more about justice. I went to Professor Michael Sandel, who says that justice is not only about the right way to distribute things, it is also the right way to value things. And 4 of the 5 principles that I mentioned just now teach us to value both the formal and informal economic, social, and cultural arrangements and the realities. And finally, when we talk about just transition in context of India, we may also want to ask what kind of justice and whose transition we are talking about, and from where do we want to transition to where? there are many approaches to just transition, status quo, managerial reform approaches, which you would see in the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development is proposing all that. But none of these are transformative. What we need is a transformative approach, and transformative approach, because if the market takes over, changes, at the moment, this is what we are seeing in Australia or UK, or it happened in USA, that market forces actually led to changes in technology, financial flows took place. This is actually not a green transition. This is what just, this is not, I'm sorry, this is not actually just transition, but it's green capitalism described by Ashley Dawson. It's just hunky-dory. But one would say that, are there examples of it? What would be the new type of transformed energy system? A new type of transformed energy system would be, owned by people, small and medium-sized enterprises, local communities. It would require, of course, more space than coal or gas, but still, Clack and others have shown that decentralization does make sense, and many people like Mary Claire Bribois of Sussex University suggests the creation of energy cities, for example. These cities are at the forefront of issues such as energy poverty, local economic development, and action. They have the capacity and resource to realize projects. They are the strong political actors. So windmills, for example, owned by communities in Denmark, the 50% cooperative ownership of all renewable energy in Germany, the wind turbines that are owned by First Nations people of Western Ontario, the Just Transition Alliance in Oregon. These are examples that we can follow. Within India, the just transition debate has just started, and it is still very top down. The iForest is a, breakaway group from Center for Science and Environment. TERI, as we know, is renowned for its widespread consultancy services to the extractive industry. But they have started the debate, and they are, thinking of what sort of framework should be, adopted. Less present within India has so far been academics and researchers. So I would say that this is a very appropriate time for us to jump in and engage with Indian academics on just a transition. Yes, present imperfect, future trend is tense. We know that the nature of the beast is quite different. It will be quite different within India to talk about just transition. There are examples of community-owned RE systems that are showing the way, and it is for us to now take over from there to change the discussion. Thank you very much.